About a year ago, I frequented one of those sites where people post a variety of funny pictures, videos, and all kinds of stupid internet memes. I didn't do much after school besides sitting on my computer wasting time back then. Sometimes I would browse the newest upload section of the site looking for pictures that might give me a quick laugh or smile. My internet connection was slow and laggy, so I always skipped over posts of videos, being too impatient to wait for any of them to buffer just to see some 30-second clip of a guy getting hit in the crotch or whatever. But there was this one time I made an exception. I spotted a video titled "Radio Host Prank Called," which quickly captured my interest. I figured something like that was worth waiting a minute or so to watch. The video clip turned out to be audio only, for a black screen, with the entire duration just being that. I probably should have expected that considering the post titled, did say it was a radio host. The man in the video is being prank called, who ran an internet radio show called The Real Eagle, where he apparently spent a few hours twice a week ranting about how white people were the only real Americans or other racist bullshit like that. The guy sounded kind of old, maybe in his 40s or 50s, and he talked in this low sort of grumbling tone. He also went by the alias Dusty. Not surprising that he wouldn't use his real name, considering the content of the show, but what was mainly important here was that during the last 20 minutes of every show, he would do a segment where he started accepting phone calls from the audience. Needless to say, it was hilarious. Every single call the guy received was just a joke, and let me tell you, it made the guy pissed. Sure, the jokes the callers pulled on him were pretty lame, but it was Dusty's reaction that always made it so entertaining. At one point towards the end of the show, you could hear him throw something at the wall and curse far away from the mic, as if he were about to leave the room in anger. After I had seen the video, I started visiting Dusty's webpage at a radio blogging site to listen to the show live. Even without the barrage of prank calls, it was funny enough just to listen to his idiotic rants on their own. We need to purge the blacks and Mexicans from our soils almost on a daily basis. The site had a chat room box on the side where everyone that visited mocked the hell out of him during every broadcast. Dusty never paid any attention to it though. The site he hosted his show off had a chat box for every individual broadcast by default, so I guess he either never noticed or just didn't care. I spent the next few months listening to Dusty whenever he was on. Every Monday and Friday from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. he was on the air sprouting the same nonsense with a little rewording. Despite all the prank calls he received, he would always still proceed with the phone call segment at the end of every show. You would think by then he would have learned his lesson and call it quits, but he never did. Similarly, you could say the same thing about me. Nothing really changed over the months that I listened to Dusty, and I wasn't even one of the people that consistently prank called him every show. To me, listening to The Real Eagle was just another way to kill boredom. Sure, the show was funny, but it never really caught on or grossed a huge following. At most, there were maybe 100 or 150 so people that were tuned into the show live at once, and I can almost guarantee that every single one of them was there to mock and laugh at him. For these reasons, what happened during one particular episode took me completely by surprise. It was the start of the last 20 minutes of the show. Everything up to the point was ordinary. My parents were out, so I had been parked on my living room couch with my laptop and headphones listening to the pathetic rantings of Dusty. Now awaiting the almost routine barrage of prank calls from his fans, this is where things began to get odd. Rather than starting the last segment like he usually would, Dusty instead had gotten strangely silent. He gets up, leaves the room without a word, and several minutes had passed without a sound. Everyone in the chat room was going berserk, clearly pissed off that they weren't getting the chance to harass their favorite bigot. Some had even started leaving, most likely thinking that Dusty had simply had enough of their crap and just left them to sit there like idiots for the rest of the show. I was about to give up and leave the live stream myself until a distinct noise of a door opening sounded through over the broadcast. Curious to see what Dusty had come back for, I stopped myself from closing the window and listened. As I heard Dusty re-enter the room, there were the muffled sounds of him shouting stuff along the lines of, "Get in here," in a few different variations followed by the muted sounds of someone sobbing. I was now even more curious. Dusty had never once brought another person on the show before, and every other broadcast it had only ever been him alone doing the show. But besides the obvious questions of who this new person was and why were they there, what concerned me more was that they were crying. And why was Dusty shouting at them in such a threatening voice? All of this had caught me off guard, and I started to get this sinking feeling brewing in my gut. The soft crying noises grew louder as Dusty and the second person approached the still turned on microphone. Now, closer, the crying from the other person was clearer. The sound quality of the microphone Dusty used in the show was far from great, and you could only hear him clearly when he talked directly into the microphone, but I could still tell that this person was a woman. Between her cries, I could hear her softly pleading. "Please," she begged, "stop it." I wasn't sure at first, again due to the scratchy audio, but it had sounded like the woman had an accent of some kind, and I couldn't tell you which, but I think you could understand why that would be relevant to mention. Before my head could fill itself with any more questions, Dusty himself began speaking to the mic with the same threatening, authoritative tone he had just ordered the woman in. "In this beautiful land we live in, filthy bastards like these wander in and taint the progress of the true Americans." His words were nothing different from anything else I've heard him say in previous shows, but hearing him say them in the current circumstances carried a sense of dread with it. I was more than a little unsettled at this point, and I was greatly reconsidering the option of leaving the broadcast. The chat box, which was usually flooding with heckling at the show's host, had noticeably decreased in activity. I imagined that everyone was most likely focusing directly on what was happening on the show right now. Dusty continued on, speaking more nonsense about a pure race and how he'd cleanse the US of all who dared to taint it, and I can't fully recall everything he had said at that point, but I was more focused on the sounds of the woman crying. This went on for a few minutes with me listening attentively, hoping that everything was going to be okay and that this woman was not actually in any kind of danger. Suddenly, Dusty's rant came to an abrupt stop and was immediately followed by a loud clicking noise. The woman began screaming in reaction, her yells gaining an echo as she ran far from wherever the microphone was placed. Her pleading words from earlier were now intensified and incredibly desperate, now loud enough to be picked up by the mic at a distance. "Please don't do this, just stop." That was when it hit me. I couldn't tell at first due to the previously mentioned audio quality issues, but the clicking noise must have been the cocking of a gun. Dusty was going to shoot this woman. My mind did not want to fully accept this belief that this woman was in serious danger, but there wasn't a way to deny it now. This couldn't have been a prank. The woman's cries for help sounded too real, and I was now convinced that Dusty had forced this woman into the location of wherever it was that he hosted this show from and planned to shoot her. I had completely frozen up. What the hell was I supposed to do? It wasn't as if I could pick up the phone and call the cops. This was a radio show on the internet. There was no way they'd be able to do anything, at least not immediately anyways. Panic began to overwhelm me as I struggled to think of anything I could do. The woman's begging had suddenly grown louder. It was hard to overhear her shouting, but Dusty also began to say something. The way his voice was muffled indicated that he had his back to the mic. Dusty then started spouting, "You've ruined our land. You are the disease and I am the cure." Unable to do anything else, the woman once again pleaded with the attacker. "You don't have to do this," the woman shouted. "I won't tell anyone. Please, just let me." And that's when it was all over. Loud bang and complete silence. All of the noise ceased, and the only sound I could hear was the rapid beating of my heart. The loud bang had sent a jolt through the body. Once again, I was frozen in place, not knowing what to do, and then my brain finally finished processing everything I had just heard. Dusty had just killed that woman. Upon the realization, my mind began to panic, and I started to try and convince myself this was all just some bad dream or an elaborate ruse. All the while, hearing nothing but the static buzzing of the broadcast through my headphones, with no sound coming from the gunman, I shook my head, desperately trying to remove the gruesome image of the woman's dead body from mind. Several more minutes of silence passed. I don't know why I didn't just close the browser immediately. I just sat there listening, unable to do anything else. I don't know how long this continued for, but eventually some of my senses began to return to me, and I moved the mouse towards the red X in the top right. But then something stopped me. In a tone that sounded as if he were grinning, Dusty spoke into the microphone one last time. "They snuck into our country by the waves of the ocean. I'll make sure they go back the same way, one piece at a time." After hearing all that, having my sensors returned, I clicked and closed the browser. Well, that was Rusty's radio show, a racist broadcast by some random guy living who knows where in the United States. Like the last one, this actually personally hits me. I stream as well, and knowing how prevalent it is for anybody to do, having a current-gen console, using a web application, or just use easy-to-use streaming software such as OBS, anyone can stream with relative ease. And I'm talking about video streams. Audio streams, well, those are even easier. Many platforms exist, and you can set up your own stream in minutes, and if you really want, you can go towards your own web page and streaming protocols if you really want it, and in that case, then you don't have to deal with anybody's rules and regulations, and you can broadcast whatever you want on your own. So now that we got the fact that this stuff is relatively easy to do, let's get on to the meat of the story. It sounds ordinary, and that's what actually makes it really good. Shows like Dusty's exist everywhere on the internet. Tons of people make shocking shows like this, and that's alright. That's just the power of the internet, say what you want, and that's about it. But it's like when we talk about serial killers in a way. You know, how many active there are in the world. This is sort of the same situation. There are many streams out there. Let's take, for example, Twitch or, an audio streaming service. 10% of those streams have that's where most of the population really is. Then the 90% of those streams is where, there's a few people, there's none at all, there's like 10, 20, 30, 50, and that's about it. There are many of those streams, and there are so many of those that go by unheard of, unnoticed, and that's about it. Dusty's stream would be something like that as well. Sure, it might be a little shocking, and sure, it will be full of material that may bait a few people into it, but it probably is one of those streams that isn't going to get very far off. A lot of people, even those people that like to troll certain streams, especially whenever they may have those call-in segments, they're still not as populated as some would like to think. So shows like Dusty's can exist. Now, if somebody can go about killing people on a live stream, that's where things get a little janky. Again, 90% of those streams where there's not a lot of people, who really knows which one of those streams contains matter like this? Especially if it's hosted on a server or a website that is run by the actual person streaming. That way, you have even less exposure and dealing with it. You can stream whatever you want at that point, nobody cares. You can even go through ways to mask your identity or your protocols out there, so it's a little harder to trace, but we're going into a whole lot of technical stuff that we really don't need to for this CREEPYPASTA analysis. Regardless, the point being is that stuff like this exists, and the fact that it's actually given out so ordinarily makes it even more creepier. Anybody on the internet can broadcast the killing of somebody else. That can happen, and it's a very, very, very weird thing to happen, very scary thing, but it is something that can happen. A show like Dusty's, this event could occur, and by some stroke of luck, well, honestly, it can fly right by, and very few people might hear of it. Sure, nowadays, with how social media heavy that everyone is, stuff like this would have been shared around like crazy, but regardless, even if that was the case, it still would have happened. And that's what makes this creepypasta really, really hit me hard, because it's something that can really happen. It's not a joke. It's no bullshit. It can actually really happen, and the fact is, even now, as you may be watching this, it could happen on a stream somewhere else, and that's what really gives it the spooks. That being said, though, that's all I can really say about Dusty's radio show, seemingly harmless shock radio show turned into a red room broadcast, is all I can really say. That being said, this has been another episode of Creepypastas, part of Haunted Gaming. Let me know what you thought about this creepypasta in the comment section below. What would you change to make it better as well? Please let me know. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.